Wait. Stop right there.
Stop right there, criminal scum!
Before you head straight to the comments to tell me that England haven't won anything for 60 years, the Premier League is a cancer upon the sport, and England fans are the worst thing to happen to football since Sepp Blatter's mum squeezed out his little bald head, I'm just going to need you to leave your prejudices and vile anti-English bigotry at the door before you come in. I know that some of us are insufferable. I am looking at you, Rio Ferdinand.
It doesn't matter who goes through here if you're England, because I believe England beat both of these sides.
And I know that Britain has invaded about 90% of countries and occupied some of them for centuries. Sorry about that, although neither I nor Rio were directly involved in that case. But just try to forget about all of that for the next 20 to 30 minutes, give me a fair hearing, and if you still think that I'm making less sense than Jordan Peterson in that Jubilee episode, then you are more than welcome to come after me in the comments for being nothing more than a chauvinistic and delusional Englishman who deserves to be imposed with a trifecta of 14 years of Tory rule, Keir Starmer, and Nigel Farage all in succession. Okay. Have you left all of your prejudices behind? Because I am about to drop an incredibly spicy take that might shock you otherwise. Alright, I warned you. Brace yourselves because here it comes. English football is pretty good. In fact, it's better than pretty good. It is a marvel, a phenomenon, and one of the wonders of the world. In a rotting and decaying nation, which has gone from ruling a quarter of the globe to being America's lapdog in 100 years, from inventing railways to not even being able to build a high-speed railway line connecting its three largest cities, and from pioneering the Industrial Revolution to manufacturing nothing but American late-night talk show house and depression, football remains one of England's vanishingly few success stories. With just 0.7% of the world's population, England has by far the most match-going football fans of any nation on earth, the most vibrant football league pyramid, by far the most competitive and best-supported non-league game, a flourishing women's football scene and now immensely successful national team, some of the best junior teams at virtually every age bracket, and of course, though not without some major caveats and criticisms that we will come on to, by far the biggest and the most watched league in all of world football. These are not insignificant facts and achievements, and as someone who spends a lot of time talking about all of the problems with English football, in terms of ownership, commercialisation, and some of the shameful episodes of mismanagement, I felt that it was only right that I celebrate all of the truly great things about the English game, of which there are absolutely no shortage, and which we can all too often be guilty of taking for granted. So sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to England, where modern football was first codified, for a celebration of some of the ways in which English football is uniquely brilliant, the awe and majesty of the world's greatest football league pyramid, and the most patriotism that you are ever likely to get on this channel, unless you ever happen to ask me about our plugs and sockets. It might seem like an odd place to start, when I could begin with any aspect of the English game, but I want to begin this video by talking about England's national team attendances. That's because it was actually while writing and researching my recent video about the struggles of Italy's national team and Italian football as a whole, and specifically while talking about the national team's crowds, that it was drummed home to me how unique English football is on this front, before I got lost down a rabbit hole of all of the other ways, and areas in which this is also true. I was drawing attention at the time to depressed crowds at Italian national team matches, including 15,000 empty seats at the San Siro for a UEFA Nations League quarter-final tie against one of Italy's biggest rivals, Germany, fewer than 45,000 fans turning up for another Nations League tie against Belgium, this time at the Stadio Olimpico in Rome, and the recent failure to sell out the 21,525 capacity Mapei Stadium in Reggio for Luciano Spalletti's final game in charge over the previous international break. Whilst my plan was then to compare the Italy national team's depressed crowds with other national team attendances, it turned out that I was suffering from a chronic case of English brain, which can of course be fatal in extreme circumstances, in thinking that these attendances for a major football nation, 2 of the 3 against strong teams, 1 in a very small stadium, and all 3 in competitive fixtures, were abnormal. In actual fact, it's not so much that Italy's national team attendances are especially low or abnormally bad, it's that England's national team attendances are freakishly high and atypically good. England don't just draw crowds of over 80,000, which constitutes either de facto or sometimes literal Wembley sellouts, depending upon ground configuration, for comparable fixtures against the likes of Brazil, Germany, Italy or Spain, even in friendlies, but also for games against the likes of Iceland, Albania and Malta. England played Malta, a nation of fewer than 600,000 people, whose national team is ranked 168th in the world, in a game that didn't matter and had basically a predetermined outcome, on a Friday evening in November 2023, having already qualified for Euro 2024, and with Malta already guaranteed to finish bottom of the group. And still, 81,388 people turned up, which is more than the maximum capacity of all but 10 national teams on the planet. We take these crowds for granted, but this isn't the norm almost anywhere else in the world, not even in Germany or Brazil. Germany doesn't have a national football stadium, meaning that they tour around a lot more than England, and tend to pick stadiums with appropriate capacities for the size of the game, the opponent, and likely predicted interest. When Germany host minnows like Liechtenstein or even Bosnia, therefore, they host them at the Volkswagen Arena in Wolfsburg and the Europa Park Stadion in Freiburg, not at the Allianz Arena or the Signal Iduna Park, drawing crowds of between 25 to 29,000 as a result. Brazil, meanwhile, drew a crowd of 57,329 at the 73,139 capacity Maracanã Stadium in Rio for a World Cup qualifier against Chile over the most recent international break. There were about 10,000 empty seats for another of their World Cup qualifiers, this time against Peru at the Estadio Nacional Mar de Garrincha. And the last time that they played a genuine minnow at home, which was either Qatar in 2019 or Panama back in 2014, and even they're both much stronger national teams than someone like Malta, they drew crowds of 31,871 and 34,204, the latter being a half-empty Estadio Nacional Mar de Garrincha, in Brasilia against Qatar. And I handpicked those two nations, Germany and Brazil, for their outstanding fan cultures and support. The gap is even more stark if we look at national teams, like France, Spain or Italy. The closest country to England right now in terms of national team attendances is Argentina, but brilliant though Argentina supporters undoubtedly are, in terms of both their numbers and the noise that they generate, even that is heavily influenced by the fact that they are very good at the moment. Argentina are the current world champions, they have won each of the last two editions of the Copa America, and they are currently the number one ranked national team in the world. 10 years ago, when they weren't world champions, albeit they still briefly topped the world rankings during this period, they saw crowds as low as 40,000 at the Estadio Monumental in Buenos Aires, capacity 85,000 now and 70,000 at the time, even for World Cup qualifiers. England, by contrast, pulled in a crowd of over 80,000 for a game against Malta, them again, but a different fixture this time, in their first home game following a humiliating exit against Iceland at Euro 2016, which was one of the national team's all-time lows. Over 70,000 turned up for a friendly no less, against Hungary, in England's first game after an almost as embarrassing 4-1 thrashing against Germany at the 2014 World Cup, and most remarkably of all, in my opinion, a crowd of 86,857 turned up at Wembley for a friendly against Switzerland in England's first game after failing to even qualify for Euro 2008, at a time when the sentiment towards the Three Lions was at pretty much its lowest ebb. There are few countries that would, or could, draw almost 90,000 fans for a decisive World Cup qualifier, or a game against the reigning world champions, let alone for a meaningless friendly at a time when everyone hates the national team. The only major exception in living memory was when there was a collective backlash against the England team, which bordered upon a boycott, following their group stage exit at the 2014 World Cup, and only 40,181 fans turned up for their next game, which was a friendly at home against Norway, in protest, but even that was an extremely isolated example, which only lasted for one game. The following month, 56,000 turned up to watch England play San Marino, officially ranked as the worst national team in the world. San Marino, that is, not England. And in their next home game, a Euro 2016 qualifier against Slovakia, the crowd was back up to a basically peerless within the international game, 82,305. England fans, therefore, are not only extremely numerous in the good times, but also extremely resilient and consistent, regardless of the competition, the opposition, and the prevailing sentiment towards and the quality of the national team at any given time. Nor is it just at home. England fans travel like almost no one else. At the Euro 2024 final, England fans outnumbered their Spanish counterparts by a ratio of at least 4-1. Even the Spain section of the ground was full of England fans. I should know, I was one of them. Most of the stadium was empty when Spain finally lifted the trophy, with about 50,000 England fans queuing up for trains outside the Olympia Stadium. And there were still almost twice as many English fans who watched the final on TV at home as there were Spanish fans, according to official television viewing figures. Only Germany had more fans at Euro 2024 than England, which was the highest attended Euros of all time, and that's not exactly surprising, given that it was hosted in Germany. German authorities estimated that 350,000 England fans headed to Germany for the tournament, most of whom weren't even able to get tickets for games due to the extremely high demand. English ticket sales at the 2018 and 2022 World Cups were depressed by safety concerns, an opposition to the bidding process or the host nations themselves, but England fans were still among the top 10 ticket buyers in 2018, out of 32 countries, and they were fourth in 2022, behind only the host Qatar, the United States, and neighbours Saudi Arabia. At the 2014 World Cup, despite getting knocked out in the group stage without a single win to their name, English fans still purchased the sixth most tickets, trailing only Brazil, the USA, Colombia, Germany, and Argentina, all but one of whom are in the Americas, where the tournament was hosted, and the one exception, Germany, being the eventual winners who played over twice as many games in Brazil as England did themselves. England fans don't just turn up for the big occasions either. Tickets for all away games are distributed by the FA to members of the England Supporters Travel Club, with access to the most sought-after fixtures allocated on a points basis, which are called caps, based upon the previous number of games that each fan has attended. As a result, England sell out their away ends everywhere from Vilnius to San Marino, often for meaningless games with practically guaranteed outcomes, against teams whose players sometimes have part-time jobs. That's just the national team. England also has the most weekly match-going supporters of any country on the planet, and, to be quite honest, even I was surprised to discover quite how many more match-going fans England has than anywhere else. The most extensive data, collected by Transfermarkt, found that the total attendance of English football matches in the 2023-24 season was 44.7 million. The next highest, unsurprisingly, was Germany, with 30.6 million, followed by Spain at 22.2 million, which is less than half as many as in England, with Italy, France, and the Netherlands rounding off the top six in Europe. When we break it down further, the most remarkable aspect isn't necessarily the overall numbers, though they are fairly astonishing, but what games they're attending. So in Germany, England's closest competitors, the Bundesliga actually had a slightly higher average attendance than the Premier League, 39,500 versus 38,500, and the second Bundesliga had a considerably higher average attendance than the Championship, 29,000 versus 23,000, but where a huge divergence starts to emerge, not just between England and Germany, but basically England and everywhere else, is in terms of the lower leagues and most notably of all, the non-league game. Of English football's 44.7 million match-going fans in the 2023-24 season, 24.4 million of them attended lower league matches. England is the only country, as per Transfermarkt's research, where the majority of fans attend games outside of the top flight. Across the whole of Europe in the 2023-24 season, according to UEFA, 76 million fans attended lower league matches. That means that almost a third of all lower league fans, which includes every second, third, and beyond tier throughout the entirety of Europe, are in England, which is home to less than 8% of Europe's total population. The average attendance in League One, England's third tier, at over 10,000, is higher than the average attendance in Ligue 2, France's second tier. Bradford City averaged over 17,000 fans at their home games in English football's fourth tier last season, with a high of over 24,000. Birmingham City's average of almost 27,000 in the third tier last season would be the 9th highest average attendance in either Ligue 1 or La Liga, above both Espanyol and Toulouse. Non-league Southend United, in England's 5th tier, have averaged over 8,000 fans at their home games this season, which is more than 3 Eredivisie teams. Scunthorpe United attracted a crowd of over 8,000 in the 6th tier National League North last season, and Bury, most remarkably of all, witnessed a record-breaking 8,000 plus attendance down in the 9th tier of English football last season. Most countries don't even have a recognised 9th tier. Among those who do, it is almost exclusively park pitches, with crowds that you could count on one hand. The Championship playoff final, which is still a second-tier fixture, despite the enormous financial incentives that are on the line, almost never draws a crowd below 80,000. The third-tier League One playoff final has drawn crowds of over 70,000 in each of the last 4 seasons since COVID, and even the National League playoff final, a non-league game which determines which team will win the second promotion spot from the 5th to the 4th tier of the English game, drew a crowd of over 50,000 between Oldham and Southend last season. For a 5th tier football match, Germany and Brazil are the only other countries where lower league and indeed non-league clubs can draw crowds in the several thousands, but, as the data shows, not with anything like the frequency or consistency of English lower league and non-league clubs, nor to the same extent. The depth of the English Football League pyramid, not just in terms of support but also its strength, talent, competitiveness and pure passion, is something quite magical that we all too often take for granted in this country, which is why it's worth protecting at all costs. Whereas in other countries, small-town teams might attract the interest of a small number of locals, who also follow one of the nation's super clubs, whose junior or reserve teams also populate the country's lower leagues, there are literally hundreds of clubs in England, with thousands of devoted supporters who live and breathe their team, most of whom have never tasted any meaningful success, and most likely never will. It's absolutely no exaggeration to say that there are only a handful of second tiers in the entirety of world football that are more professional and competitive than the 5th tier of the English game. Most countries struggle to maintain 2 fully professional football leagues, a few have 3, and arguably Brazil has 4. But only England definitively has 4, and if you count Brazil as having 4, then England has at least 5 since virtually every National League club is now fully professional. And there are about 4 times as many people in Brazil as there are in England. Almost everyone in England lives within a stone's throw of a football club, which has some form of stadium and fan base where they can go and watch their local team and become part of that community. No country on earth has a more impressive array of stadiums, or stadia, at every level than England, from the world's best national stadium in Wembley, which Pelé once called the heart and the capital of football, through to non-league Carlisle United, playing in the 17,030 capacity Brunton Park. Again, this is something that we take for granted. Whereas there is talk of Italy, who are maybe the worst offenders in terms of Europe's major footballing nations in fairness, struggling to cobble together 5 suitable stadiums to co-host the 2032 Euros alongside Turkey without rebuilding or majorly renovating some of their biggest grounds, when England was forced to pick just 6 host venues for Euro 2028, that meant leaving out the Emirates, Old Trafford, and Anfield. Alright, Alfie, I hear you say. England has lots of match-going football fans, some impressive stadiums, and the world's biggest and most competitive football league pyramid. But when are you going to address the elephant in the room? The men's national team haven't won anything since the 1966 World Cup, almost 60 years ago, and therefore, English football should be embarrassed, deeply ashamed, and you should probably take this video down before the inevitable final defeat on penalties at the 2026 World Cup. And, in some ways, I agree. For England, which has a decent, if not enormous-sized population, which codified the rules of modern football, which had a multiple decades-long head start over most of the world in terms of developing and playing the game, which is home to the world's best, or at least the richest football league, and which is obsessed with the sport, unlike almost anywhere else, to have only won 1 major trophy ever, is a pretty shocking underachievement. England should, at the very least, based upon the country's fundamentals, have won as many trophies as France and Spain, and probably as many as Germany and Brazil. It is worth noting, as covered previously on this channel, that England were very strong in the formative years of the game, as they should have been given their head start, but that they didn't participate in the 1930, 1934 or 1938 World Cups, and in the 1940s, when England probably had their best ever team, there were no World Cups because of World War II. Italy won back-to-back World Cups in 1934 and 1938, but in 4 games against England while they were world champions, they lost 3, drew 1, and won none, and the Italians didn't actually beat England for the first time until 1973. When England finally entered the World Cup for the first time in 1950, they were a massively depleted force compared to throughout the 40s, and they treated the competition with such disdain and unseriousness that they didn't even book any training facilities. This is all true and important context when considering England's early lack of success in what we now consider to be major tournaments, but I am acutely aware that it probably sounds like cope, and 70 years is still more than long enough for England to have won more than just one World Cup. Basically, what I am saying here is that, historically, I just concede this point. My argument in this video isn't that English football is perfect in all aspects, and that the England team are the greatest national team to have ever existed. That would be patently absurd, but for what it's worth, and since this video is primarily about the way that things are now, I do feel obliged to point out that the England team are very good. I know this is unsayable in some quarters. The prevailing wisdom is to say that England are terrible, both in England and abroad, to call them all useless bottle jobs, and to make out that narrowly losing finals isn't meaningfully different from losing against Iceland in the round of 16, but what can I say? I guess I'm just a contrarian. England have reached back-to-back finals at the last 2 Euros, having never reached a single Euros final before that, losing on penalties in 2021, and to an 86-minute winner in 2024. They reached the semi-finals of the 2018 World Cup and the quarter-finals of the 2022 World Cup, where they arguably actually had their strongest team and played their best football, but just lost 2-1 against eventual finalist France despite having more big chances, twice as many shots on goal, and over twice the expected goals, with Harry Kane producing a rare miss from the penalty spot. Also, just because this is a pet peeve of mine, the same people who say that England's run to the semi-finals in 2018 is meaningless because they had an easy run, will also dismiss the idea that England were arguably the 3rd best team at the 2022 World Cup, on the grounds that they were knocked out in the quarter-finals, dismissing the fact that they played France, who only lost the final on penalties in an incredibly close quarter-final where, just statistically speaking, if nothing else, they had more possession, more chances, and more shots on goal. Again, there is no way of presenting this argument that won't sound like cope to some people, but it is nonetheless just factually true. In recent times, England, currently ranked 4th in the world, in between France and Brazil, have been the most consistent national team in Europe, if not in the world. They are the only European nation to have reached the last 8 of the last 4 major tournaments. Brazil are the only other national team to have reached the last 8 at their last 2 World Cups and Continental Championships, the Copa America in their case and the Euros in England's, as Argentina were knocked out in the round of 16 in Russia in 2018. I can already see you thinking of this meme or video right now, and, well, it's true. For all of England's cup runs and consistency, they haven't won anything. But it is also true that if England had gone out in the group stage of the last 2 World Cups, as Germany have, or if we had failed to even qualify for a World Cup in over 10 years, as Italy have, then we would never hear the end of it. This idea that nothing matters if you don't end a tournament by lifting the trophy seems to me to be both fairly new and fairly unusual. I am just about old enough to remember Germany players being given a hero's welcome when they returned home from the 2002 World Cup as losing finalists, and England fans being very envious of Germany reaching the semi-finals of 3 successive World Cups between 2002 and 2010, and 3 successive Euros between 2008 and 2016. Just because they didn't win didn't mean that we thought Germany's tournaments weren't meaningfully different to our own. That is to say, going out in the round of 16, getting grouped, or failing to even qualify. We were envious of them playing in big games, winning knockout matches, and getting to follow their team until the final stages of tournaments, even if they didn't lift the trophy. As someone who attended every England game at the last Euros, whilst, obviously, I would have quite liked it if we had won the final, the idea that us going out in the round of 16 or in the final aren't substantively different because either way you haven't won anything is not only silly, it probably speaks to a depressing development within football discourse, and even in the way that some people interact with the sport. Jude Bellingham's last-minute overhead kick against Slovakia, beating Switzerland on penalties, and Ollie Watkins' 90th-minute winner in the semi-finals against the Netherlands didn't result in a Euros winning campaign, but that doesn't mean that they weren't all magical moments for England fans, or that they were no better than the turgid tournaments which preceded Gareth Southgate's appointment. Even less enthralling matches, like tournament qualifiers, are also taken for granted. England haven't lost a World Cup qualifier since October 2009, 16 years ago. It is the world's longest ongoing unbeaten run in World Cup qualifying, and whilst lots of people, including and in fact, especially England fans themselves, will say that qualifying is easy and that qualifiers are a formality or even meaningless, go and tell that to Italy fans, four-time World Cup winners who haven't qualified in over a decade, and might not even qualify for the tournament in 2026, following a 3-0 defeat against Norway, Netherlands fans, who missed out on both Euro 2016 and the 2018 World Cup, or even England fans themselves not all that long ago, when we failed to qualify for Euro 2008. I don't want to sound too old here, I'm not even 30 yet, but I guess there will be quite a lot of people watching this who aren't old enough to remember England failing to qualify for Euro 2008 and watching a tournament without England in it. It was rubbish. Serbia are ranked 32nd in the world, above Norway and Poland, who recently beat Italy and drew with the Netherlands in World Cup qualifying. Ahead of hosting England over the most recent international break, Serbia were unbeaten in World Cup qualifying, they were unbeaten at home for over 2 years, and they hadn't even conceded a goal at home since November 2023. During that time, Serbia have defeated both Austria and Switzerland, and drawn against Denmark and Spain, maintaining their place in the top-flight Group A of the UEFA Nations League. In an international break where Germany lost 2-0 against Slovakia, Kosovo beat Sweden 2-0, and Brazil fell to a 1-0 defeat against Bolivia, England smashed 5 past Serbia in Belgrade without return, extending their run without conceding in competitive fixtures to over 10 hours. This is just considered to be the norm. Then there is the women's game, of course, which has seen absolutely astonishing growth and development in my lifetime alone. The England women's team are now capable of selling out Wembley Stadium for their biggest games, and attracting crowds of over 40,000 for games played in Newcastle and Sunderland. Despite touring all over England, the Lionesses have only played a home game in front of a crowd of fewer than 20,000 fans once in the last 3 years, whereas Italy's men's team have done so twice in the last year alone. The Lionesses attract bigger crowds than some of the world's biggest men's national teams, and we barely think anything of it. Yet when they go to Spain, they play in front of crowds of 12,000, 10,000 in France, and just 3,000 in Portugal. Having been banned from playing at FA-affiliated grounds for 50 years, from 1921 to 1971, after the FA declared the sport, quote, unsuitable for females, the England women's team couldn't even qualify for the Women's World Cup at the start of this millennium. They were losing 8-0 against Norway and had sub-5,000 home crowds as recently as the early 2000s. Now they are back-to-back Euros winners, with a World Cup final appearance in between, and 2 semi-final appearances preceding that. Arsenal, meanwhile, just became European champions in the women's game. The Women's Super League has the highest attendances of any women's league in Europe and the second highest in the world, behind the NWSL, and rising, and the engagement and participation in the sport among young girls is incredible. Then there's the England under-21s, back in the men's game, who have won the last 2 under-21 Euros back-to-back, the under-20s, who won the World Cup in 2017, the under-19s, who won the Euros in 2022, and the under-17s, who also won the World Cup in 2017, as well as reaching that year's under-17 Euros final. Across the men's, women's, and the junior games, England are the strongest footballing nation in the world, by some margin. As a trifecta, in recent years at least, there's only Spain that can rival them at all. And yet again, at the Women's Euros final this year, the stadium was full of England fans. Even in terms of disability-specific football, like cerebral palsy, blind and visually impaired, or amputee football, which might not immediately come to everyone's minds when they think about a country's footballing culture, but can make a world of difference to the lives of people with various disabilities or conditions which prevent them from playing non-disability football, England is consistently one of the most welcoming and competitive countries in the world. We are a nation that revels in misery, and I am often happy to join in with our national pastime, but these are all things that are worth celebrating. You might have expected me to start this video by talking about the Premier League, the biggest and richest league in world football, but I'm actually going to end with it. That's because I think there are lots of complexities to the Premier League, lots of aspects of it that are worth criticising, and that, in a lot of instances, it represents some of the worst aspects of English football. Those include rising ticket prices and participation costs, which have served to gentrify and socially cleanse English football crowds, especially in the Premier League, as a result of pricing a lot of ordinary families and people out, the prioritisation of money above almost everything else, and in almost every instance, and the selling off of proud institutions of the English game to foreign billionaires, nation-states, and asset management firms. Football clubs, like almost every other beloved English institution, have been sold off to foreign states and American private equity firms, leaving us at their behest. That is why, in the long run, what American billionaires want, whether that be overseas league games, the scrapping or shrinking of historic domestic competitions, or breakaway super leagues entirely, that is what we will get. Again, the point of this video isn't that English football is perfect, or even that it isn't deeply flawed, just that it is also deeply brilliant in ways that we often neglect to fully appreciate. I can also perfectly understand resentment towards the Premier League from football fans basically everywhere else in the world, and indeed here in England, due to the hegemonic role that it now occupies and the financial disparities between it and every other league in world football, destabilising the equilibrium of the game in Europe and beyond. Having said that, if it was Serie A, as used to be the case, or La Liga that were in this position of total dominance, I have little doubt that English football fans who raise complaints about it would be told to cry more and be accused of being sore losers. I can respect the Bundesliga, whose financial restraint is at least in part due to the league's governance, and it is a governance and a degree of fan ownership, consultation and involvement, which I and many other English people, I assume, envy in a lot of ways. I must say, I do have a bit less sympathy for Serie A and La Liga, since their owners and administrators are just as shameless, unprincipled and cash-hungry as the Premier Leagues, for the most part. They are just worse at their jobs. In fact, the greed of the biggest clubs in La Liga, for example, is part of what held them back, and the greater redistribution of the Premier League's broadcast revenue allowed smaller clubs to buy better players and become more competitive, making for more entertaining games and competition between themselves and the league's elite. That's not a defence of the worst excesses of the Premier League, just to be clear, which regular viewers will know that I could hardly be accused of justifying. It is just an observation. It would also be disingenuous, while criticising the might of the Big Six, for example, not to acknowledge that none of Europe's other Big Five leagues, and even less so those below them, like the Dutch Eredivisie or the Portuguese Primeira Liga, are more open or competitive at the top end of the division. Bayern Munich and PSG have ironclad grips upon the Bundesliga and Ligue 1 titles almost every season, and will continue to do so while their economic might over everyone else is so enormous. Real Madrid, Barcelona, and to a lesser extent Atletico Madrid form a fairly untouchable Big Two or Big Three in La Liga. And while Serie A has been the most competitive of the rest since Juventus' run of 9 straight titles came to an end, the gap between the league's 6th highest and its highest revenue-generating clubs, 108.6%, is still considerably higher than in the Premier League, 52.7%. There are other problems too, like the plainly unsustainable finances of the Championship, the EFL, and the English game outside of the Premier League as a whole, the vile racist abuse, obviously by no means unique to English football, but no less shameful because of that, towards black players typically, most recently Antoine Semenyo on the opening day of the new Premier League season, and the impotence of supporters who have become so placid and devoid of solidarity and meaningful collective action in response to assaults upon our national game. Even here, though, it is rarely the case that English football is uniquely reckless, malevolent, or spiritually cocked. Clubs in several other countries go bust on just as, if not even more frequent bases. Racism is a collective scourge throughout European football and beyond, and, in a rare act of defiance, English football fans were actually the most organised, the most vocal, and the most effective in opposing the European Super League proposals, though it should be said, no Bundesliga clubs agreed to join it to begin with for what should be fairly obvious reasons. What's more, whilst England is the racist abuse of Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho and Bukayo Saka, and we can't hide from that fact, it is also the response to that abuse in far greater numbers. That's not to diminish the problem, but English football, broadly speaking, is incredibly diverse and representative. 4 out of England's 5 goal scorers against Serbia were black or mixed race. Meanwhile, Jed Spence is reported to become the first Muslim to have represented England in the same game. Football is a rare arena in which people of all class and ethnicity backgrounds in England, and even gender now of course, can become hugely successful and revered public figures, which is why ethno-nationalists harbour such extreme resentment towards the sport and towards the national team, whilst claiming to be patriots of course. England invented and codified modern football, and Britain, at least, exported it throughout the globe. It has since become by far the most popular sport in the world, and the fundamental rules or laws of the game have barely changed since 1863. The man who codified those laws, Ebenezer Cobb Morley, is from my home city of Kingston upon Hull, yet there is no statue of him outside of Hull City Stadium, or anywhere in the city. There are no murals of him as far as I'm aware. There's not even a street or road named after him. If the man who codified the laws of the most popular sport in the world came from a mid-sized city in Albania, Azerbaijan, or Argentina, I have little doubt that he would be honoured and remembered in a more meaningful and visible sense. By the same token, English football, not just its origins but as it currently exists, is one of the wonders of the world. Our attendances, in every realm, our Football League pyramid, and our representative teams as a whole are without peer anywhere else in the world, and we should shout about and celebrate these successes more. Or should we? I think there probably should be a bust of Ebenezer Cobb Morley somewhere in Hull, but more broadly, I think there is something profoundly English about not shouting from the rooftops about these things, not taking excessive pride in what has long been the norm on this island, and not needing to tell people how great we are. Recently, there has been a campaign in England of people erecting flags left, right and centre, some of them as an act of perceived patriotism, and some of them, in their own words, as a form of intimidation. With respect to any American viewers, and I love you all of course, to me, the plastering of flags everywhere, singing the national anthem at sporting events, and having $2 billion stealth bombers fly over stadiums is a very American phenomenon, and is the sign of a young and insecure nation, and America is still very young, trying to assert itself and its national identity within the world. This was never the case in Britain or England. Such outward displays of so-called nationalism would be perceived not only as being uncouth and fundamentally quite strange, but also inherently un-British. The same goes for turning Remembrance Day, which was a day of solemn reflection on the unspeakable horrors of war and the senseless waste of life when I was a child, into some kind of bizarre grief contest with ever larger and shinier poppies pinned to people's lapels, worn ever more elaborately and for ever longer periods of time, in a sort of performative and sometimes even celebratory display meant for other people, with ever less introspection and meaningful reflection. So, what I'm saying is that we should be more mindful of celebrating English football and everything that's great about it, but we shouldn't shout about it, like I just have for 30 to 40 minutes, because that is very un-English, and in fact, maybe everyone else has been celebrating it, I suppose, they just haven't mentioned it because they are fully aware of that fact. Now what, I ask you, is so confusing about any of that? I don't think that we need to engage in self-congratulatory nationalism. It tends not to be very dignified, but if we must do it, then it should probably be about football. England's football culture is unique. It is one of the country's only genuine growth industries, and much as we might get mocked, and indeed mock ourselves, for repeated tournament heartbreaks, we are actually quite good at it. Alright, you can demolish me with facts and logic in the comments now, point out that I am as delusional as Rio Ferdinand following a group stage win against Albania, and cancel your channel memberships. I suppose I asked for it.
I don't know one can compete with us right now, the confidence we've got. People might say I'm getting carried away, I don't care.
I promise you that I will be back to pointing out all of the things that are wrong with English football within the next week. Thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video, even if you were coping and seething throughout. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course make sure that you are subscribed, and have notifications turned on not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens very shortly, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one. You can also find me on various social media platforms, typically via the username at HITC Sevens. If you want to do the same as Rihanna and follow me, as she recently did. You can also support me additionally, should you wish to do so, which Rihanna hasn't done, oddly, because, she could afford to quite comfortably, couldn't she, of course? Either via the Alfie Potsama YouTube channel, where you can become a channel member, or via buymeacoffee.com/Alfie Potsama, where you can also become a channel member, but Google won't take nearly a third of it. Yeah. You know, if you're willing and able. If not, don't worry, enjoy the videos, they will still be available for free. I'll see you all soon, take care out there, I love you all lots as ever. Bye.